Thanks for coming, and I'm so honored to be here. I want to tell you a little bit about the Aspen Writers Foundation. I'm going to keep all of this very brief because I know you're all excited and thrilled to hear Anne tonight. But it was something that I wasn't aware of, and I had lunch with Lisa the other day, and she was saying, talking about this exciting collaboration with the Aspen Institute. It's expanded the focus of the Aspen Writers Foundation, but it's really important that we all know this. The foundation depends on all of us giving contributions, whether they're large or small. It doesn't make any difference. Their focus is, in the Valley and on programs for children and these special nights like this one at the Wheeler Opera House. So it's important as you're looking at how you want to give, and I know that we're a very giving community, that you look at putting the Aspen Writers Foundation in that list, because it's because of them that we as readers get to enjoy somebody as special and wonderful as Anne Patchett. So that said, I would like to thank the gracious donors and that have given to the foundation to present tonight's event. It's sponsored by Isa and Cato Shaw and Daniel Shaw, the City of Aspen, the Aspen Times, Aspen Peak Magazine, the Baldwin Gallery, Les Dames, Colorado Creative Industries, Aspen Public Radio, the Aspen Skiing Company, Blanca and Kavanaugh O'Leary, and Asbarian Rudd Company. And the whole season this year is dedicated to the memory of Isa, Cato Shaw, and Daniel Shaw's parents. So I just want you guys to know that, and let's acknowledge them. Couldn't exist without this. And then I get the great honor of introducing my friend Anne Patchett. And many of you are here because you've heard her speak before. But for those of you that aren't aware of her history, I'd like to just tell you briefly a little bit about Anne. She's the author of 5 novels, including the New York Times bestseller Run, The Patron Saint of Liars, which was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, Taft, which won the Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize, The Magician's Assistant, and the Faulkner Award-winning and Orange Prize-winning novel Bel Canto. She is also the author of 2 works of nonfiction, What Now? And the New York Times bestseller Truth and Beauty, and has written for many publications, including The Atlantic, Harper's Magazine, Gourmet, New York Times, Vogue, Washington Post. It's amazing. Her newest book, State of Wonder, was released in June 2011 and has received critical acclaim. Anne Patchett lives with her husband Carl in Nashville, and this is the really exciting thing that she's done, and she's the co-owner of a honest-to-goodness bookstore, Parnassus Books, a neighborhood bookstore in Nashville. So go visit that if you're down that way. So all I want to say is that I met Anne several years ago here, and that she is the definition of a true friend. She's direct, she's honest, she's funny, her love is unconditional, and I'm so honored and pleased to introduce this wonderful person, woman, author, friend, Anne Patchett.
I love you. Love you too. Ooh, there are a lot of you. Hi. I'm really glad you're here. And I'm really glad I'm here. And I'm really glad that my friends Lisa and Annie are here. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to read you a little story. Then I'm going to tell you another story. And then we're going to do some questions. And then I'm going to sign books. That's my agenda. I always think it's good to know up front. And I only read for a max of 20 minutes because I cannot bear to hear anyone in the world read for more than 20 minutes, but that's just me. Okay, so this is the story I want to tell you. I have been doing this a long time. Aspen, man, where is the humidity? I love it here. I would live here, but no humidity at all. I'm from Nashville. My husband is from Mississippi, and we've been here for 4 or 5 days now, and we're both walking here and going, anyway. When I published my first book, The Patron Saint of Liars, in 1992, I was 27 years old, and I'm 48 now. I'll spare you the math. And the way it worked, it was a little book. I was the classic definition of a mid-list author. But back in those days, and they really don't do this anymore, they would send the little baby authors out on book tour to go and meet the people in the bookstores. And they didn't want to put any money into it, but because they weren't going to get any money out of it, obviously. But they thought it was really important that we go out into America and meet the booksellers. And so what they did is they gave me, I think it was $3,000, and I went to 28 cities in my car. I slept in truck stops, I ate in truck stops. And this was before cell phones. And so I had a big bag of quarters. And every day I would call my publicist on the payphone at the truck stop. It was really something that doesn't exist anymore. It was kind of cruel. And the one thing that is true, I think, about all New York publicists, and many New Yorkers in general, is that none of them took geography in 7th grade the way we did in Tennessee in Catholic school. So they would really book me in Boston one night, and Cleveland the next night, and Connecticut the next night, and Indianapolis. It was crazy. So what I would do is I would drive, and then I would get into town, and I had a pink cotton dress from Putumayo. I don't know if anybody remembers Putumayo in the 90s, what I wouldn't give to still have that dress. And I kept it out in the trunk, all nice and neat, and then I would go to the McDonald's that was closest to the bookstore, because even though I am a vegetarian, McDonald's always has the cleanest bathrooms. And I would go and I would put my little pink dress on, and then I would drive to the bookstore and I would walk in. I would say, hi, I'm Ann Patchett. I wrote The Patron Saint of Liars. I'm here for my 7 o'clock reading. And of course, nobody was there, right? I mean, and why would they be? Because they had never heard of me. It was a Thursday night, 7 o'clock. No one was there. But my publisher had told me that the point of going on book tour was to get to know the girl behind the counter. Not the person who owned the store, not the person who managed the store, because they also were not there at 7 o'clock on a Thursday night, but the girl who worked the cash register would be there. She had not read my book. Nobody had read my book except my parents at that point. And they were, so-so. But if I could be nice to the girl who worked the cash register, the idea was, and this was clearly stated, that the idea was after I left, she would like me so much that she would read my book. And then when other people came into the bookstore and would say, I don't know what to read, this girl would say, oh, I just read this new book by Ann Patchett, The Patron Saint of Liars, and she would hand it to that person. And the reason this worked was there was one universal truth about the girl who worked the cash register at the bookstore. Either she was getting married or she wanted to get married. And I was a contributing editor at Bridal Guide. That was how I made my living back then, because my best friend from college was the editor of Bridal Guide, and she didn't really feel like going to all the trouble of hiring writers. So I wrote the entire issue every month. I had 6 pen names. I used the last name of every guy I had ever dated, and I wrote the whole magazine, which is actually in itself a kind of a great thing, because unless you have a fairly serious mental disorder, the whole readership for bridal magazines turns over every 2 years. And that in itself is freaky, to think that somebody is reading Bridal Guide for 2 years. But then at the end of 2 years, they would republish your article, repay you for it. And it went on for a long time. Anyway, so what I would do in Indianapolis in the Little Professor bookstore at 7 o'clock on a Thursday night was talk to this young woman about her hopes and dreams for a good engagement ring or a better engagement ring, or the napkins, should the napkins match the bridesmaids' dresses? And I would do this for 2 hours, and then I would, oh, that was the other thing they would say, my publisher would always say, sign stock. Because if you sign stock, they can't return it. Once you sign your name on a book, it's theirs, they have to buy it. Well, this, my friends, is a lie, because to this day, I have opened sealed boxes of State of Wonder from a publisher, and they have been signed. So I know those books are coming back. So I did this. I did this through my first 3 books. I doggedly went out. Actually, by my 3rd book, Magician's Assistant, I got plane tickets, some. But it wasn't until Bel Canto, which was my 4th book, and frankly, not until the paperback of Bel Canto, because the hardback of Bel Canto didn't sell very well. It was not until the paperback of Bel Canto that I would go to a bookstore and there would be 200 people there. And for the first time, I thought, oh my God, they lied to me. This is about actually making money. This is about people coming in and buying books while I'm here, and I sign them and we sell the books. It had never occurred to me. I was so gullible, without guile, that I actually really did think that the whole point of book tour was only to meet the girl behind the cash register. Okay, so when I would go off on book tour, which I still do, which is kind of my life on earth, book tour, I would give a reading. So now I'm going to read, and then I'm going to tell you the rest of that story of going out into the world. This is another thing. The first time I ever gave a reading from Patron Saint of Liars was in something like the Writers Institute. It was in Santa Fe. But I remember that the room had a blackboard, a giant blackboard, and I got there an hour early, and I wrote all of the characters on the blackboards and all of their connections, because I thought that I had written a book that was so unbelievably complicated that unless you would have a chart like 100 Years of Solitude to follow, you would never be able to understand what I was reading. Now I'm kind of like, you know, this is from the middle of the book. You're smart, you'll figure it out. In this scene, a group of people in the Amazon, they are on a boat. They are on a pontoon boat, and they have gone to mail letters. There are a couple of you in this room, no doubt, who have heard me do this before, but I have polled the audience and members of the Aspen community extensively, and they have said it was all right, I could do it again. So there are these 5 people on the boat, and they've mailed letters. Now they are going back down the river at the end of the day. 3 of the people on the boat are American doctors. Dr. Alan and Nancy Saturn, who are married, Dr. Morena Singh, and then there are also 2 members of the Lakashi tribe on the boat. Benat, who is about 18, who wants to be a naturalist, a tour guide, but he doesn't speak English, and Easter, who is probably 11 or 12 and is profoundly deaf. Interesting little aside about Easter, when I was on book tour, because you really do get a lot out of book tour, weird things you can't imagine. I was on book tour for a run, and I was speaking at the National Cathedral in Washington one night, and it was a very magic night. Many sort of life-changing things happened in the signing line that night, and one of them was a woman came up to me, and she said she was an interpreter for the deaf. She said, I would like to see a character in a book that is deaf and no one talks about it and no one cares, and he's deaf and they're over it and it's not a book about being deaf. And I said, not a problem, I can do that. So that's why Easter is deaf. And I also that night met a woman in the signing line who I talked to and I gave my email address to, which won't happen tonight. And because of that connection, her best friend ended up marrying my best friend. So that was beautiful too. Okay, so there are these 5 people and they're in a boat, and it goes something like this. They had not passed another living soul since they left the Jintas, and the world seemed something silent and wide, belonging only to them. On the left, there was what appeared to be a crisp field of floating green lettuce. Bennett tapped at Easter's arm, and the boy turned the wheel and took them in. Beneath the sound of bird calls, there was the most delicate sound of crunching, as if the boat was making its way through a lightly frozen pond in December, and the ice, half the thickness of a window pane, was breaking apart to let them pass. Morena leaned over the front of the boat and watched the lettuce compact beneath the pontoons, while behind them the plants knitted themselves back together. We were here, Morena thought, and we were never here. It was a green so much brighter, so much fresher than anything she'd seen in the jungle. Long-toed birds strolled across the delicate meadow with such confidence it was tempting to think that those tiny floating plants could hold the weight of a single pharmacologist. The question was then, was the water a foot deep or 20 feet deep? Bennett smacked at Easter again and held up his hand, and Easter stopped the boat. Bennett lay on his belly, his head and shoulders over the side. He had seen something. The Saturns came, leaned over him. Morena leaned over him. "Is it a fish?" Nancy said. "Pexy?" Bennett shook his head. "I don't see anything," her husband said. Easter kept his eyes on Bennett, who, without looking his captain again, pointed his hand to the left, to the right, a little back. Easter held the throttle low and scooted the big boat around in the smallest possible increments, until Bennett, every ounce of his attention fixed to the sweet spring of lettuce, abruptly held up his hand, and Easter killed the engine altogether. The silence was startling. The budding naturalist, still flat on his stomach, then dove that same hand down through the leaves and began to pull the colossus of all snakes into the boat. Human instinct dictated that the snake must be kept away from the face. And so Bennett straightened his arm to rigid, as if wishing to cast it away from his body while holding on too tight for the snake's comfort. The reptile's long, recurved teeth snapped ferociously into the air, diving towards Bennett's wrist, while Bennett whipped the head from side to side, buying time until he could close the distance between head and hand. He rolled onto his side and then his back, managing somehow to pull the first half of the reptile up on board while it flailed like a downed electrical wire. At its neck, the snake was as big around as Bennett's wrist. And from there, the body, smooth scales of darkest green with black blotches on the back and then creamy light underneath, swelled into a size more in keeping with his thigh. The snake kept pulling up, more and more of itself slithering up and onto the deck in thick, muscular rolls where it sought its way onto Bennett's body, extending out against him, kneading him, while Bennett struggled mightily to keep the two faces apart. Do not let the faces touch. "Put it back," Nancy screamed in English, the language that stood between Bennett and his dream of becoming a tour guide. "Drop it!" "Snake," Alan Saturn said, and then repeated the word endlessly for good measure. He had caught it, sure enough, but he hadn't caught it close enough to the head. There was too much available snake above Bennett's hand, and the snake's enormous gaping mouth sought purchase, its jaws opening wider than such a little head should reasonably dictate. In a flash, there was evidence of many rows of smaller teeth lined up and waiting to clamp into skin. Only by swinging it wildly did he keep the snake from sinking into his wrist. Bennett seemed fixated only on that 6 inches of snake between the top of his fist and the tip of its tongue, while completely ignoring the enormous body that was working its way heavily onto his own body now. And Bennett, who was wet with sweat and the water that the snake had brought on board, was laughing. There, on his back, pinned like a wrestler in an unsporting match, he roared with the powerful joy while he tried to work one hand upwards with the assistance of the other hand. Easter, ever helpful, grabbed onto the lower half of the guest and tried to pry it off of his friend. There was too much coiling and uncoiling for an accurate measurement, but the snake appeared to be about 15 feet long, 18 when it stretched. Bennett appeared to be 5 feet, 5 inches, and was outweighed by as much as 50 pounds. The three doctors pressed away, screaming various invectives in an unhelpful language. Morena wanted to jump into the water and run across the lettuce with the long-toed birds, but who could say that the snake didn't have a family down there? There was an odor that none of them recognized, the smell of furious reptile, an oily stench of putrid rage that sunk into the membranes of their nostrils as if it planned to stay forever. The back half of the snake whipped up and made itself a knot around Easter's slender waist and wrapped, and at the moment its head swung past, Easter reached into the air, his hand a quarter second faster than the snake, and grabbed its throat just below the head, well above Bennett's fist. Easter had caught the snake that Bennett had caught. Oh, the whooping, the triumph, and the revelry. They shook the jungles with their screams, Bennett and Easter. For sure enough, Easter was screaming, and the sound was so piercing, so much like the agony of death, that all three doctors were sure that the boy had been bitten, and they lunged forward with the instinct of human decency to save his life. But Easter was grinning madly as he gripped the snake while Bennett, who was considerably stronger, held fast below. They looked into the creature's mouth now like a carnival attraction, while the tongue, that silvered spark of light, licked towards them. He caught an anaconda, Alan Saturn said. He caught an anaconda with his hands. Alan Saturn seemed to be at the perfect intersection of the thrilling achievement of the Lakashi people, the terror of Morena and his wife, and the rage of the snake, whose eyes had focused into two pinpoints of murderous desire. Easter coughed. Maybe Morena understood it before he did, but of course that would be impossible to say. In a moment, everything was clear to her, and she stepped through the wall of her own revulsion and fear and took the tail end of the snake that was pressed into Easter's hip. Its flesh was at once clammy and dry, cool to the touch despite the terrible heat of the day. She had once dissected a snake in a college biology class, a small black garter snake, long dead and stinking of formaldehyde. She had cut it down the center and pinned it open on a wax bottom pan. To the best of her memory, that was the only snake she had ever touched. She touched the second one as she worked to pull it from the boy. When she had pried a little of it loose, she moved her hands up the body, hand over hand, like she was working her way up a rope, except the end of the rope began to wrap around her wrist. It was a muscle like nothing she had ever encountered. It did not fight against her. It didn't notice her. She pulled. Easter coughed again. Bennett could see the problem now as well. His friend was wrapped inside the snake, and the snake had figured out a way to loosen the hand that held its neck. Bennett slid his hand up to cover Easter's hand just as Easter's hand fell away. Easter tried to work his own small hands in between himself and the snake, and when he exhaled to get his fingertips in between them, the snake felt the movement of his breath and squeezed. Easter's eyes shot first to Morena, and there she saw the very soul of him in his fear, and she pulled, and Alan's hands were by her hands, and they were pulling together, all of them, Bennett from the throat, while Nancy Saturn cried for a knife, and then Jacques. But Bennett could not hear them now. He was frozen to the snake, who was in the business of killing his friend, who may have been 11 or 12, but was very small for his age. "Tell me there is a knife on this boat," Nancy Saturn said. Easter's lips were turning blue, either from the lack of oxygen or the weight of the snake. He went down on his knees. It occurred to Morena that his spine could snap, and they all went down to their knees. Morena knew there was a machete strapped to the steering column of the boat. It was the very knife that Easter had used to trim away the branches when he tied the boat to the tree, and in an instant she was up. The knife was nearly as long as her arm, as heavy as a tennis racket, and she put the blade just above Bennott's fist and with a single pass sliced off the head. And it would have been the greatest moment of her life had cutting the head off killed the snake. But beheading it changed nothing. On the deck, the busy head continued to snap its murderous teeth, moving in a slow circle as the jaw opened and closed, while the body went about the business of strangling the boy. Jesus, she said. She could see the tendons standing out on Bennott's neck. She could see his crooked bottom teeth, his open jaw jutting forward in exertion, the blood of the headless snake running down his arm. While Bennott continued to pull the top of the snake, the Saturns continued to pull at the bottom, and in the middle, Easter continued his death. Morena began to saw into the rolls of the headless snake, her hand at Easter's head, the point of the machete at Easter's toes. Her objective was to cut through both coils simultaneously, as she doubted there would be time to do this twice. At no point did Easter make another sound. He would not use another teaspoon of his breath. He stayed stock still inside this jacket and kept his eyes on Morena. First, there was a large vertebral column that required Morena to lean in as she sawed, as much as she would have leaned in to saw apart a human arm with a long knife at a bad angle. She worried about pressing too hard and cutting into Easter, but Easter was still very far away. She cracked the vertebra in the first coil, and then working the knife from side to side to break the second bend, she cut down through the ribs, the thick muscles in the belly scoot. When she was very close to Easter, she put the knife down and ripped the bit of snake that was left with her hands. The heavy weight worked in her favor then, tearing itself apart as it fell to the deck. Nancy Saturn picked the boy up then, light as air, this child, and stretched him out beside his murderer and blew into his mouth and blew. Her lips reined in to cover so small a mouth. With one hand behind his neck, she tilted back his head, and with the other she blocked his nose and blew until she saw his chest rise, and none of them could tell whose breath it was. And she stopped for a minute, and it was his. Shallow and uneven at first, but his own. She lifted up his shirt and lightly touched the red welts across his torso, and Alan Saturn kneeled beside her and put his ear to Easter's chest. Bennott crouched away from them, his head against his knees, his back heaving with his breath, while on the other side of the boat, Easter's eyes blinked, and Morena sat down beside him then in the pool of widening blood and took his hand. It was still daylight when they got back. Alan Saturn was driving the boat, and even though a couple dozen of the Lakashi were waiting on the shore with their branches they held in their hands, the branches had not been lit. When they saw the boat, they stood up to watch, but they didn't jump or cry out. It could have been because the travelers had only been gone for half a day, and it could have been because Dr. Swenson was not on board, but either way, everyone on the boat was relieved, though there was more to celebrate now than there had been in their entire lives combined. But when Alan Saturn pulled up next to the little dock and the Lakashi came on board the boat, the calling and the crying broke forth in earnest, not the theatrical display of the week before, but a deep and abiding joy that Morena had not seen. 3 men picked up the 3 large chunks of snake from the blood-slicked deck, and the 4th man picked up the head, the very head Morena had meant to kick into the water, although she had been unwilling to touch it again, even with her foot. They carried off the pieces of the snake, each as heavy as a small tree, and hoisted them about their heads to show the ebullient crowd. It would be a feast to tell the grandchildren about for years to come. There would be anaconda for dinner tonight. So, thank you. Okay, so here's the other half of the story. I live in Nashville, and I have to tell you, honestly, I don't love bookstores. And I have not had a lot of, well, think about it. I spent the first half of my professional life, you know, sitting there by myself at a table with a little sign that says, "Meet the author today," and no one coming, which was fine. It was a little humiliating, but you do it for years, you get really used to it. And then the second half of the professional life, where there are a whole lot of people bearing down on you, which can be sort of frightening sometimes. So I tend to be a little nervous in bookstores because I spend so much time in them. But what happened in Nashville is that we had two bookstores. We had Borders, and we had a bookstore called Davis Kidd. Davis Kidd was our locally owned and operated independent bookstore about 10 years ago. And then it was sold to a company out of Ohio called Joseph Beth Booksellers that had about 10 stores throughout the South and the Midwest. And both of the stores, when Joseph Beth bought Davis Kidd, they moved it into the mall. So we had a Borders that was 30,000 square feet, and we had a Davis Kidd that was 32,000 square feet. That's the size of Macy's, okay? And the amazing thing, because everybody thought our stores both closed. They both closed within 6 months of each other. People thought that they closed because people weren't buying books and people were using their e-readers and people weren't supporting their bookstores. Both of those two stores, both of them bigger than 30,000 square feet, were profitable every single month they were open in Nashville because we bought books. They both closed at a corporate level. So there was problem with the business. And everybody in Nashville, oh, we felt so sad. We just felt terrible about it. Where's our bookstore? Somebody's going to open a bookstore. There were all of these committee meetings in town. Who's going to open a bookstore? Meanwhile, my book comes out, State of Wonder, right? I don't have a bookstore in the town where I live. And the place that I have been going to do my framing since I was in high school, the Beveled Edge, they call me up and they say, "Do you want us to sell your new book?" And I said, "Yeah, that would really help. That would be great. That would be super." And then the place that I get my clothes altered, Stitch It Alterations, they called me and they said, "Do you want us to sell the book?" So you can go into Stitch It and get your pants shortened and buy a copy of State of Wonder. So every time I did an interview with anybody locally, I would always say, and you can go to the Beveled Edge or Stitch It, and you can buy a signed copy, and I'll go over and sign these books for you. But still, it's not the same. You know, I love my locally owned and operated alteration store, but I really wanted there to be a bookstore. And there wasn't. And I waited, and I started thinking, oh my God, am I going to have to do this myself? What a nightmare. I don't want to have a bookstore. And I talked to a lot of people. I talked to a friend of mine whose family had founded Dollar General. And he said, "Don't do this." He said, "You're like somebody who's a really good cook who thinks they should open a restaurant. And there's no correlation between being a good cook and opening a restaurant. You have a job, write your books." I say, "Thank you, good." But time goes by, no bookstore, no bookstore. And finally, I'm introduced to a woman named Karen Hayes. And she wants to open a bookstore too, and as total strangers on a dime, we decided to go into a partnership, and we opened a bookstore called Parnassus Books in Nashville. It's 2,500 square feet, which I don't know how big this theater is, although I'm getting pretty good at this. I am going to say that the bottom level, including the stage, is probably about the size of my bookstore. The most incredible thing that has ever happened to me in my life. This store opened November 15th. Well, for one thing, I've had a nice career. I do fine as a literary novelist, okay? I'm not setting the world on fire, but I'm doing fine. All my adult life, I make this product, right? At home, in my spare time. It's called a book. I make these myself in my house. and I've done all right. I opened the store that sells that product. I got to tell you, I am the most famous person you would ever want to meet right now. But the bookstore opened on November 15th. On November 15th, there was a photograph of me on the front page of the New York Times. What is up with that? Imagine a group of highly paid consultants meeting with HarperCollins publishers in New York, and they say, what are we going to do to get this literary author on the front page of the New York Times? Okay, she could hijack a bus of school children. She could transport drugs inside of live rabbits or something across. What would I have to do to get on the front page of the New York Times? Not that it was ever my dream. Opening a 2,500 square foot independent bookseller would not have shown up on anybody's list. But NPR did so many programs about this that they started calling it National Patchett Radio. I was going and doing the morning shows on all of the networks. I was on Martha Stewart's show talking about what books you should buy for Christmas. Why? Because I am America's most famous bookseller. I've been doing this for, I don't know, like 10 weeks. I don't go into the store that often either. On the 20th of this month, I'm going to be on the Colbert Report. Okay, all right. You want to hear something really funny? I've never seen the Colbert Report. Why? I read books. I don't watch television. I'm moving into this whole other world, and what's been so incredible, and the list of incredible things, it goes on and on. I find that not only I have this store, but I have been put in the role of being the national spokesperson for independent booksellers. And everybody seems to want to hear this message. And the message is so fantastically clear to me, and I am so loving this new life and this new job where I can stand up and say, this happens in a cycle, like the cicadas. You start with a little independent bookseller and it does well and it makes money and it feels good and it got bigger and it expanded and maybe it got a couple of different branches and people could see independent booksellers making money, and so then all of a sudden we got these big mega superstore chains like Borders and Barnes & Noble, and may God please, may Barnes & Noble survive. And those superstore chains, which we used to hate, squashed the little independent bookseller. And then Amazon came along and they can sell you anything in the world, and they squashed the superstore, which probably never needed to be 30,000 square feet. And then, like a phoenix coming up out of the ashes would be me, the little independent bookseller. And it's this amazing story of redemption. We are so packed night and day with people who come in and say, I learned my lesson and I am going to support my local independent bookseller. The thing I think in my whole life that I feel proudest about is that I am creating jobs and a tax base and supporting my community. And that I have this message, which is, in a nutshell, the best price doesn't necessarily represent the best value. And that we have to, it's really, really easy to have something come to your house, but it is actually important to think it through and say, I would really like there to be some cops in my community. I would really like there to be some teachers. I would really like there to be some jobs, because this idea that the most important thing is the lowest price for us hasn't actually been so good for our communities. The other thing that is astonishing that I didn't ever understand was that my first publisher and my first publicist was right. And the person who rules the world is the girl behind the cash register. And that's the thing that Amazon is never going to give you, because the people who work in my store and the people who work in bookstores all across this country, and especially the people who work at your local independent bookstore Explorer, are smart readers who, you talk to these people and you think, why are you not running local government. Why are you working in this bookstore? You are so smart. And they can put the book in your hand that you need. Because most people who come in, as we all know, we walk into a bookstore, we want to be inspired. We want somebody to tell us what we're going to love. We want somebody to say, I read these books, and I can say, here now, read this one. All of this has been revelatory. People are so afraid that Amazon is going to take over publishing, but if you publish your book on Amazon, trust me, no one is ever going to find it, because it is the biggest haystack in the world. That doesn't mean actually that I am fundamentally against Amazon, because I have octogenarian cousins in rural Kansas, and I know that is the only way that they can get a book. But I'm going to explain something to you quickly about ebooks. State of Wonder, 50% of the books that it's sold have sold in ebooks, 50% in hardback. The book at this point has sold a little over 200,000 hardbacks. So that tells me a little over 200,000 people are still interested in buying literary fiction hardback book. That's a really good number. The thing is most important to me is that you're reading. And how you read is your own business. But if you want to read ebooks and you want to go into your bookstore and look around, buy a children's book as a gift, buy an art book, buy some cards, buy something to keep them in business. You can't just use it as a showroom and look around and see what you want and then go home. The other thing about ebooks that a lot of people don't understand is you can buy them from your local bookseller and download them onto your reading devices, unless it's a Kindle. But if it's an iPad, if it's a Nook, if it's a Sony e-reader, you can support your local bookseller and e-read all at the same time. Another thing that you might find interesting, I don't know, I find it interesting, if you buy a hardback copy of State of Wonder, I get $4.05. If you download it on your e-reader, I get $2.37. If you wait and buy it in paperback, I get $1.15. So I lose money when it's out in hardback, and I gain money when it's out in paperback. So that kind of is the way it all works. That might be more information than anybody wants about book selling and sales. I am so interested in it, and I feel honestly like I am at this sweet spot that nobody else is standing in, where, you know, I've got the best-selling book, and I've got the bookstore, and I have all of this experience in publishing, and now, you know, for the next 15 minutes, thank you, Mr. Warhol, I am going to be a famous bookseller. I would love to answer questions, and the way we're going to do it is you're going to raise your hand, you're going to ask me a question, I'm going to repeat it, and that's the party. Yes?
At the end of the book, I got the impression that Rowena might have been.
You know, we can't talk about that here. The question is about the end of the book, but I'm working on the assumption that a lot of people haven't read this, so we could maybe whisper in each other's ear in the signing line. Yes. Yes.
As a Minnesotan, I'm wondering how you chose Eden Prairie, which is quite a distance from the Amazon.
The question is, how did I choose Eden Prairie, Minnesota for the book to start out in? I wanted a place that was as different from the Amazon as I could imagine. And the thing that I couldn't stand about the Amazon is it's very claustrophobic. Unless you're right in the middle of the river, there's no field of vision. It's just pressing in on you. Minnesota is flat, 360 degrees, you can see everywhere. And the reason that I chose Eden Prairie, my sister used to live in Mankato, so I've spent a lot of time in Minnesota. The woman who cuts my hair is from Minnesota, and I said, give me the name, a fantastic name for a town in Minnesota. And she said, oh, Eden Prairie. And I was like, that would be the one. Thank you very much. Yes?
What would be your best advice for an aspiring young author? I know there must be a lot of advice, but if you could pick.
Oh, no, there's one advice. My advice for an aspiring young author is volume. Period. End of story. Read everything you can get your hands on. Tons. Big volume all the time. Eat books up. Read, read, read. Same is true with writing. Don't be precious. Don't polish, polish, polish. Don't spend your life working on one paragraph. Think of yourself as a pipe full of sediment and gunk. And the only way you get clean water is to flush an enormous amount of water through that pipe. There is junk in you, terrible, sentimental, bad poetry, horrible. You need to write it out. You can't just think it out. You have to flush it out and get it out. And behind it comes clear water. So just tons of reading, tons of writing, over and over and over and over again. People don't think of writing as a discipline. People don't think of it as a job. People think of it as inspiration, and that is ridiculous. Inspiration is fine in high school if you're writing one poem. But if you are 48 and you want to pay the mortgage, you really need to have a job. And that means you go to work, and you think of art as work. Because it is, and it's so much more beautiful and fulfilling if you go at it as a job, as work, because then you're strong. It's like dancing. You know, if you were going to do a great leap across the stage, a beautiful grand jeté, you have to have the framework. You've got to have the muscles. You've got to be able to do it over and over and over and over again. That's not something you can do once, or when you hit, you break your ankle. So volume, that's your key word. Yes? Please.
The inspiration for Bel Canto come from?
Oh, no, that's easy. The inspiration for Bel Canto was based on a true story, the 1995-96 takeover of the Japanese embassy in Lima, Peru by a group called Tupac Amora. Have I said that sentence before? Yes, I have. And when I was reading about it in the paper, it was the most unterrifying terrorist event. And remember, this is a pre-September 11th world. And you know, it was this big deal. These terrorists have taken over an embassy. But then in the paper, it started to say, terrorists order out for pizza. Terrorists request more soccer balls. And it turns out they were a group of kids. And they held these people for 4 months. They let all the women go. They let all the workers go. They let most of the hostages go. They kept a core group. And I followed that story. And I really, very early on, thought, I want to write a novel about this. And yes, my pleasure. So easy. Yes?
To your process, two parts. Are you an outliner? And do you have like a page count or a word count per day?
The question is, am I an outliner and as opposed to an outlier? And do I have a word count or a page count a day? No, I don't have a page count or a word count. And am I an outliner? Not exactly, sort of. I do everything in my head. So I do know what's going to happen and how the book will end before I start to write it, but I don't write that down. I just think and think and think and think, and I'm always trying to kind of get it down in my brain. Anybody in the balcony need to talk to me about anything? You guys okay up there? All right. Yes?
I was going to ask a similar question. What was the inspiration for this book?
The inspiration for State of Wonder was sort of twofold. One, I do a lot of college and university programs. They have these things called the freshman read, where the kids are all sent a book over the summer before they start their freshman year of college, so they have this common experience reading program, and then they bring the author in. It is often me, because I went to Catholic school for 12 years. I tend to write books in which people don't have sex and no one swears. I don't mean to write those books, but at the end of the book, I'm always like, wow, there it is again. So every time I go to one of these programs, the people who organize them always say the same thing to me. Next year, we would like to have a book by a contemporary female author in which the main characters are women who are not being oppressed or victimized by men or falling in love. Can you recommend that book? And I never could. And I write the book I feel is missing. I write the book I want to read. And so I started thinking, I really want to write a book about women who are doing serious, important work, trying to do good in the world, and this is not about them being victimized in any way. And then I decided I really wanted to write a book about a grown-up student finding her important mentor, teacher later in life. Because I have had teachers in my life, especially as an undergraduate at Sarah Lawrence, who completely changed my world. I loved them so passionately. I wanted to please them so much. But the trick is the teachers have had thousands of students and they don't remember you. Because if you are a teacher, the only students you remember, are the, well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, are the ones that are really bad. The ones that make your life hell on earth are the ones that stick. And the ones that get their homework in on time and were really good, you forget. I have also had the experience of sitting in a signing line and having somebody come up, you know, with my book and say, Miss Patchett, I was your student 15 years ago, and you totally changed my life, and I was going to medical school. I had already been accepted at Cornell, and I took your advanced fiction writing class, and I dropped out, and now I'm teaching English to third graders, and I just think, oh my God. But I don't know this person. I don't know their face. I don't know their name. How could I have changed the life of someone that I don't remember? And that, of course, is also part of being a novelist, too, because you get a lot of stories about, I read your book, it changed my life in this way. And so that also was very much the inspiration, those two things for State of Wonder, which was a lot of fun, yes.
Number one, do you do all of your own research?
Do I do all of my own research?
And number two, how much time did you spend in the Amazon?
How much time did I spend in the Amazon? Do I do all of my own research? Well, I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, yes and no. I just go to people who are smarter than I am, who are experts in their field, and I ask them some questions. So if I'm writing about a pharmacologist, I don't sit down with a bunch of books and teach myself pharmacology. I find some pharmacologists, ask a couple of questions, and take notes. I can find anybody, and one of the great truths about human existence is that people want to talk about what they do and what they love. And I mean that with a great heartfelt kindness. And I love to talk to people, and I love to listen to them and to listen to what they do. So I can find anybody and sit down, lean forward. This is another great trick for writing, and say, I am really interested in what you do. Tell me about what you do. I went to the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland to talk to the head of malaria research, spent an entire day with me, had not read my books, didn't know me from dirt. But when I called him up and said, I am so interested in malaria, how many years has that guy been waiting for the phone to ring? That somebody says, I want to see your mosquitoes more than anything. I want you to tell me everything you know about mosquitoes. He was crying by the time I got there. So that's half. The other half, how long was I in the Amazon? Too long. We were there for about 10 days. And this is the all-encompassing story of my time in the Amazon. I took my husband with me. And after about the second day, he put his hand on my arm and he said, oh, God, I can't believe you brought me here. This is so beautiful, so amazing. You have brought so much into my life. I would never have seen all of these beautiful things without you. You're incredible. About day 4, he held my arm a little tighter, a little higher up, and said, I cannot believe you brought me here. And I just want you to know that other people's husbands would not do this with them. I was really glad I stayed too long, because the claustrophobia, the horribleness of it really does kick in after 4 or 5 days. I really didn't need to go. And the reason why, all you got to do is watch those old Werner Herzog movies. Aguirre, the Wrath of God, Fitzcarraldo. There's some documentary that he did about making Fitzcarraldo, in which he's standing in front of a tree going, the jungle is death. It is disgusting. And you're like, yeah, that's it. So while it was, you know, a good experience to go, I remember the last day, I was in a place that had internet access for 30 minutes once a day. And for $30, that internet access. And I emailed the travel agent and said, this was like day 7, you've got my credit card on file. I don't care what it costs. Get me out of here. I will go back online in 20 minutes for your response. 20 minutes later, I came back online, and this woman, who I'd never met, to her everlasting credit, wrote me back, and she said, I can get you out of there 30 hours before you were going to get out of there anyway. It's going to cost you $4,000. I will not do it. Go get a bottle of Pisco brandy, lock yourself in your room, and just grow up. And I did. And the other thing that was so hysterical about that last day, we had read all the books that we had brought. And it was this room, with a lot of life on the tile floor. And there was one 40-watt bulb screwed into the wall over the bed. And this was a very fancy place. This was the only jungle lodge in the Amazon that boasted 24-hour-a-day electricity. Future reference, shoot higher than that, okay? So we had read, my husband and I had read every book that we'd brought, and all we had left, and I don't even know why I had this. Somebody had given it to me just as I was walking out the door. Somebody had given me a copy of Eckhart Tolle's, what was that called? The New Earth, right. And it was like, I would read a page by the light bulb, rip it out of the book, hand it to my husband. He would read it. And we had this amazing conversation about Eckhart Tolle that I think never would have happened. That would be the understatement of the world had we not gone to the Amazon. Okay. Other questions? Yes?
How long did it take you to write this book from the first idea to you finishing it?
How long did it take me to write the book from the first idea to I finished this book? This book was faster. I know it took me about 14 months to write it now, which is fast for me. I can't tell you how long I was thinking about it beforehand because the thought comes up so indistinctly and gradually, it's almost impossible to say, oh, this is where it begins. It could have been a year, could have been 6 months, I don't know. I mean, there are books that I think about for years. When I was starting book tour for this book, I was in the UK, and my publicist in the UK, I don't think I've told anybody this story, was on a train with me, and I'd never met her before. She was a very nice woman, and she was telling me about her children, and her son's name was Albie. It was short for Albert, Albie, and that was it. And I don't know what this book is about, really, but from that moment, I thought, oh, okay, I know this book is about a kid named Albie. I absolutely know that. And not just like in a way of I think, oh, I like that name, but I think there's like this brain thing, like, the tumblers click into place. And so I spend my days thinking, where is Albie? Where is he going? How old is he now? What is he doing? And I've got some of it now, but it always starts from a different place. So, do you count those first 2 months that I just walk around saying, Albie, 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 Albie? People always say, why don't you take notes? And I think, because for 2 months I'd have a notebook in which I wrote, Albie, 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 and that would be it. Yes?
In State of Wonder, what influenced your idea for researching pregnancies to such rivalry?
What influenced my research of everlasting fertility in State of Wonder? I wanted to write a book about malaria. I wanted to write a book about a bait and switch in which somebody was developing such an incredibly profitable drug that the pharmacology company wouldn't care and would let that person go off the rails. It would be so much money. So I thought, okay, what drug would be so profitable? First thought, eternal youth. Second thought, effortless weight loss. Third thought, my personal favorite, really thick, fantastic hair. And then fourth thought, fertility. So it was just profit. I just thought, what do Americans want more than anything? And And I have to say, I mean, it's funny to me when people say, oh, you wrote a book about fertility. I do have some thoughts on the subject, and this idea that all doors are left open for all eternity, and we can just put our decisions off forever. Not making a decision ultimately is a decision. And so one of the books that really influenced me is Pinocchio. Did anybody read, have you read Pinocchio lately? It's pretty good. I should talk about books you should be reading too. Pinocchio wants to never go to school and eat candy all day and shoot pool. And what happens to Pinocchio is a cautionary tale. He becomes a jackass and he's sold to the circus. And I think that I had a lot of fun playing around with that Pinocchio concept, which is if you get your wish, which is you never have to make up your mind, that isn't necessarily good news. So I had a lot of fun writing about that. I don't have children. I actually never wanted to have children. And I spent my entire life with people from, you know, my very closest friends to absolute strangers coming up to me and saying, I know you think you don't want a baby now, but you better go ahead and have one because you're going to want one later and then you won't have one. So go ahead and get one now. Just a really weird thing to say to somebody. Anyway, that's fertility. We have, my friend in the curtain says we have time for one more question. Yes?
You just mentioned that you want to tell us books we should read.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, tell us books we should read. This is the very best part of owning a bookstore, that I can just say to people, read this, read this, read. I take books, not only do I give books to people, and people are a little afraid of me, because as friends of mine point out, I'm scary. So if somebody's in the store and they've got a couple of books, I say, well, if you're buying this and that, you should also buy this. But I also take books away from people. If I'm talking to them and they seem smart, but they're holding a stupid book, I'm like, listen, this is not for you. And I do that in other people's bookstores all the time too. Okay, so, well, you know, you see somebody holding The Marriage Plot by Jeff Eugenides, Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson, and the new Nicholas Sparks. And you say to yourself, one of these things is not like the others. So maybe they got confused and you need to help them. So two books that I really love, brand new novels. The Marriage Plot by Jeff Eugenides, which I thought was much better than Middlesex. Oh no, I did. Okay. You know what? That book was sort of a biopic for me. That I had a lot of deep connection with The Marriage Plot. Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson, a little novella about logging in Oregon in the turn of the century, a gorgeous jewel, tour de force. A book that I love, The Family Fang by Kevin Wilson. Has anybody here read The Family Fang? What a treat. Hey, Fang. A really, really weird book. If weird isn't for you, it's about two kids whose parents are performance artists, and they make their art around using their own children in public disturbance. And it's really a book about art and about how weird it is to be a member of a family. There is a book, this is 4 words, okay, ready? The All of It. This is a book that whenever I say the title, people think I am saying the all of it like an Italian typewriter. So it is by Janet Heidinger, H-A-I-E-N, and it is a book that I found in a used bookstore in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, out of print, moldy. A friend of mine said, oh, this is such an amazing book. I paid 35 cents for it. It was such an amazing book. I had it reissued with a foreword that I wrote from my publisher. The author is dead. It is, after State of Wonder, our #1 best-selling book. I keep a huge stack of them by the cash register, and when anyone's checking out, we say, have you bought your copy of the All of It yet? And if they haven't, we force them to buy it. And everyone who reads that book, it's 130 pages, it's tiny, comes back and buys 10 more. If you're in a book club and you're tired and you don't want to read Anna Karenina, because you should, read the All of It because it's moral and complicated. It has plenty to talk about. If you're looking for something kind of smart but lighter and a little happy, thought-provoking, a really good book. Penelope Lively's new book, Where It All Began, I just finished this week. Another book I've read so much this week. I read The Jungle Book this week by Rudyard Kipling. And if you've only seen the movie, go and get the book. I cried on the plane from the sheer beauty of it. Right now, I am 2/3 of the way through Catherine Boo's book, which actually came out today, called Behind the Beautiful Forevers, about the slums of Mumbai. And it is much easier and more lighthearted and accessible than you would think a book about the slums of Mumbai would be. And I'm probably, now you're going, enough, stop. We have Classic of the Month at Parnassus Books. This month, it's High Wind in Jamaica by Richard Hughes, which is a fabulous book published in 1929. You just can't imagine what a pleasure it is to have a big table right in the middle of your store covered with nothing but High Wind in Jamaica. And people are like, what is this? And I'm like, it's the book you never read, but you absolutely have to read it. Now, I'm going to tell you how we are going to do the book signing if you would like your book signed, because you will not come as no surprise, I have a method. When I went out on book tour this summer, my friend Elizabeth Gilbert called me up and she said, revelation, life-changing, I no longer personalize books. I just sign my name, it goes 10 times faster, it's a beautiful night. I said, I'm sure it is, but I am not Elizabeth Gilbert. And you have 6,000 people at your reading. But this is what I do now. I have 2 lines. I have an express line, and I have a regular line. If you would like me to just sign my name and the date, you open the book to the title page, you come up, and I sign my name, and you get to go home. If you want me to write happy birthday to your aunt, if you want to tell me a very sad story that's going to make me cry, if we went to high school together, if you want to take my picture for your Facebook page, then you go to the regular line. When everybody from the express line is done, and you cannot believe how fast the express line goes, then I will personalize, I'll do anything you want. I'll have my picture taken with you 12 times. So, I come to Aspen more than any place else. I love it. I love the Writers Institute. I love all you people. Honestly, this is the nicest, friendliest, smartest town. Support your beautiful bookstore and be proud of it. Thank you very much.
Quick reminder, do join us in the lobby for the express line and the picture line. And don't forget that we have an incredible series. Next up is Geraldine Brooks and Tony Horowitz. Thank you all so very, very much for coming. Check out aspenwriters.org for all the latest literary information in this wonderful town. Thanks. See you in the lobby.